So, all right, thank you. So, the internet's changing, and we saw this a lot with Craig's talk. And the internet's going to be changing a lot in the next couple of years. And one of the things that's going to be impactful is the convergence or the oncoming run out of V4 addresses. And where does V6 play into that role, and where does V4 play in that role? And a lot of this has to deal with policy. And ARIN is here. And I'm the CTO of ARIN, by the way. I'm Mark Costers. And one of the things that we wanted to do is go through some of these things that are being discussed within the ARIN community, of which many of you are a part, but actually have some very interesting sort of operational impacts. And some of them we're seeing today. For example, 4-byte ASs. We ourselves at ARIN have a 4-byte AS on our West Coast colo, and we're willing to peer with anyone. And it's amazing how many people cannot at this point. They come to us and say, hey, we'd like to peer with you, and we say, okay, we got a 4-byte AS, and they say, oh, we can't do that yet. And that's kind of a problem, because we're running out of that as well. There's also WHOIS cleanup, the WHOIS information, trying to make it a little bit more robust and reliable and consistent. V6 policies, what's going on there? And relaxed transfer policies, and et cetera. All these things actually have a large impact on our operational community. And one of the things that we found is talking to people, it's amazing how many people really don't understand or know some of these looming sort of events are coming up on the horizon. And the time to actually make a sort of easy landing for these events, like V4 runout, is now, so that we don't have to go through any sort of pain. And one of the things that's kind of useful to know is that ARIN is a membership-based organization, and it's really you as a community who makes the policies. And if you don't like the policies, you have the opportunity to change those. And to that end, there's a ARIN meeting that's right adjacent. Well, it's actually in the same building, same spot as NANOG here, and it starts on Wednesday. And if you can't stay through the week, you're more than welcome to come to a session on Tuesday night where we're going to be talking about policies. And I believe it's starting at 6 to 7, and usually people get really hungry after that, at least I do. So there's going to be free pizza and beer after that as well. So there's opportunity for you to have your input despite not staying for the ARIN meeting, or if you have the opportunity to stay, we'd like you to stay to see what's going on there and actually hopefully you can have some positive impact there. So what we're going to do is we have two 30-minute sessions, and we're going to break between. The first section is we have a esteemed panelist selection here of 5 panels. Each panelist is going to have 5 minutes to speak, or 4 minutes, excuse me, to speak about 2 things. The first one is the relaxed transfer policy, and the second one is V6 policies. The panelists are Tom Daly, there he is, Daniel Alexander, Igor, Kevin, and Aaron Hughes. So what we first like to do is talk about the relaxed transfer policy. In RFC 2050, and I was one of the co-authors of that, a long time ago we had a discussion about whether or not we should allow the ability for people to actually pay for address space and be able to transfer from party to party. And at that point I said, no way, we just cannot do that. That is just create unfairness. And things are starting to change that way, especially with V4 runout. There's this thing called the NERPM, or it's affectionately known as, and it's basically is ARIN's policy manual. And this policy manual, again, is actually put together by you guys, and we're, ARIN as an organization, we actually implement those policies. And one section of this, 8.3, has come from a policy proposal 2009.1, which in itself was somewhat controversial, but it allows for the transfer of internet resources to an operator who can justify it. And this is outside of mergers and acquisitions, which was there before. So this brings up the question of whether or not is this a slippery slope to a market-based economy for address space? And so each of the panelists has their own sort of views on this, and I like them to start coming up one by one here. and talking about these things. And after that's finished, we'll have whatever time's remaining for questions and answers. So I look forward to hearing from you guys. And let's go ahead and first start out with Tom. Come on up here, Tom. I'm staying out of Windows.
Windows is hard. So the company that I work for is Dynamic Network Services. We're a managed external DNS provider. And so this policy, we took a look at it and spent quite a bit of time deciphering exactly what 8.3 added to it. And it took, myself and an attorney and a couple business guys to look at this and understand what's going on. But really the key thing to keep in mind here, as Mark said, is that it really removes the M&A requirement for address transfers. It keeps the requirement for justification. So it doesn't really just allow any arbitrary transfer. It allows a justified transfer. It keeps ARIN in the middle of the process as the transfer agent. But, you have to ask yourself the question of, does this create a market for gray space, if you will? So, I got a 24 and I use it for clean operations, and you get a 24 that's poison space. It's on RBLs, it's on blacklists, and maybe let's just trade that space, and you'll give me some money to trade that space. What does this allow the bad bodies on the net to start doing in terms of moving their assets around and what space they may be routing their badness from is an interesting factor here. And then the other thing is you can justify receiving space under this policy based upon need, but it may be a subset of the space that's available for transfer. So that brings the question, what happens to deaggregation and rib size upon transfer? And then over time, if we kind of keep going down this path, we wonder, does some entity, possibly ARIN, suddenly become a title agency for address space? And is that a new business opportunity for ARIN? Is it something they want to get into? Or do we get into the concept of a company, just like when you buy a house, does a title search on the property and make sure it's not encumbered? Does the same thing happen to address space? And then does it create precedents for further easing on the policy? And if that's true, and the policy gets too eased out, do things like RPKI and SIDR become impossible because we don't really know who owns the space anymore? Does it detract on what the ARIN team's been doing for WHOIS cleanup efforts? So these are kind of the questions we have around this relaxed transfer policy. Yeah, and that's it. So.
Great, thank you, Tom. Okay, Igor, you're up next.
So I'm Igor, I'm principal architect with Yahoo. So like Mark said, effectively the policy allows for paid transfers of IPv4 space provided the receiving party qualifies for that space with ARIN in the first place. It doesn't relax the requirements, it just makes it easier or makes it possible to get space once it's runs out. So is this a good thing? In my opinion, yes. It means that people can continue operating their business and growing their business without worrying about running into a brick wall in 2012 or whatnot and can't get any more IP space. Yes, it makes it more expensive to operate your business come around that time, but it makes it possible to continue doing so. It also puts a very clear financial implications and incentive on IPv4 to IPv6 migration. It lets you plan what to do. It lets you plan more or less how much it's going to cost. It also lets you make pretty smart business decisions on whether you want to continue using IPv4 as you have in the past, or if you want to start migrating from v4 to v6 and being able to recoup that engineering effort. For others, hell, Couple of examples here. I know some entities that will take them 2 days to free up a /16 worth of address space. If it costs them $20, $30, $40,000 in order to do so, they can recoup the money and actually possibly make money in the process. There's some other companies that it may cost them hundreds of millions of dollars to rewrite all of their applications, databases, everything in order to move it to V6. Maybe just cheaper to acquire additional V4 space. It's a win-win for both parties, and it just makes sense. And also, if you've ever tried to justify, a large migration effort to your management, being able to put fairly accurate cost figures to what it's going to cost to not do this is very important. So what are some of our concerns about it? Well, it took me about a couple of hours to figure out what it's trying to do. Then I had to talk to a lawyer who had a slightly different interpretation, talk to another lawyer who had yet a third interpretation. Then actually Tom and I spent a couple of hours discussing what it actually means. We think we understand, but the way the policy is phrased, can't we just make it in actual simple English? Maybe add a flow chart or something? The obvious question is also who's going to create and run the market? Is this going to be an eBay type setup? Is there going to be escrow to hold the IP space before it changes hands? All of those details need to be worked out. Obviously, the question is what's going to be the impact on the routing system when deaggregation comes around? And more importantly, should ARIN care? ARIN has repeatedly stated that they're not responsible for routing of the net blocks or routability of them. Their responsibility is assignment. Should ARIN policies even take that into account? And my personal view is no. And do the benefits outweigh the trade-offs? And for us, absolutely. Because being able to operate a business past 2012 is critical. And these policies will make it possible. Maybe more expensive, but they'll make it possible. So that's it. Thank you.
So next up is ARIN.
Mark,
Yeah, go ahead.
can I ask the speakers to maximize their slides? Control L, I think somebody taught us.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Aaron Hughes. I'm with Six Connect and work with quite a few companies, actually. One thing that may not be clear here, but is true, is that transfers are going to happen regardless of LIR support, or RIR support for that matter, but transfers are going to happen. So this is a policy that helps enable tracking and accuracy of data. Not that permits it to happen. There are certainly companies that are going to need IPv4 resources post-Diana and RIR runout. And we're going to have operational impacts with or without a policy. It's just going to happen. So there are drawbacks and there are benefits. One of the drawbacks that I noted here is an odd one, which is that our sales department now has to get involved with knowing whether we have V4 resources for our customers or whether they bring them in as part of the close of sale. Today we do this by justification and depending on the company policy, obviously, and if you exceed a certain amount of space, you might say, go back to the registry and get it yourself. But at some point, we're not going to be able to say that because there won't be any space available, and our sales process may change to we can acquire some space for you on your behalf with a certain budget, or we can sell you some space directly. There's going to be a lot of interesting things that are going to happen with the justification process that is going to be harder for both us and our customers. Today, there's nothing in place for signing, so we don't really have a way of tracking who has the right to announce IP space outside of who is data. We have no real secure BGP or signing authority in place, and even when we do, particularly in this industry, it takes a long time for us to adopt things across all of the companies and all of the different regions. And then, of course, there are bad people that are trying to make money off resources, some that they are assigned and some that they're not assigned. People are trying to steal space. And then this room and other LIRs are pretty bad today about tracking and filtering. We don't use IRR data as much as we should. I don't think all of us check letters of authority when we receive a customer that says, I have this space in this AS and this is what I'm going to be announcing. Half the time we just say, okay. And on top of that, things like IRR are really easy to spoof. Most of them are still email from, so you can simply spoof a record, announce some space, and wait for someone to complain about it. And then, of course, that puts some operational impact on us. Headaches trying to figure out ownership, and potentially headaches trying to communicate with another ISP to get someone to stop hijacking your space. So another issue is M&A is going to be much harder to determine the net worth of an asset. How do we know when we're acquiring a company what value to place on their V4 resources as time goes on? This means that price may go up for a company that we might expect to pay a certain amount for, and over time, this is going to make due diligence very difficult. Here's a great kicker. ARIN just sent a letter to all officers of all organizations registered as ARIN members. It was an attempt to educate officers to help them be aware of V6 up and coming, and to require officers to attest to resource requests. So now they have this new thing. Maybe they understand it, maybe they don't. But what they do understand is that they're financially responsible for the company, and they probably don't want to run out of V4 resources. At the same time, they may do a good thing, which is start talking to their CTOs and their VP of Ops and so on, and get involved with implementing V6. But if I'm looking at this from a CEO's perspective, I also want to make sure I have as much V4 resources as I need as early as possible. So there's high potential for fraud of resource utilization, and high potential for things like taking everything that's currently natted in an RFC 1918 space today and renumbering that into public V4 so you can use that as justification to get more space now. It's perfectly reasonable. It follows policy. It means you can justify new space, and then when you're running out, you can go back to renumbering those in 1918 space and that. And this, to me, is really scary. This is a scary, significant issue, and it's probably going to cause runout to happen faster. So aside from the drawbacks, there are certainly benefits. Contact information should be more accurate. The likelihood is this process is going to clean up old contact information, new contact information, and future transfer information. And at some point, I think that there will be more value in space that's transferred through someone like ARIN or a registry, in that it's likely that it's cleaner space than space that's been transferred without the help of a registry. And of course, it gives us the option to stay in business if we need V4 to survive. I hope this forces us all to write better tools. Use something like assigning authority, use SBGP, use better IRR data, have some way to verify a resource should be announced by the entity that says they own it. And I hope also that we take the time to start cleaning up our deaggregated prefixes now that don't need to be deaggregated. This should, as we start running out of router resources, we're going to need to clean up the routing table today. And I think that this kind of transfer policy should make us aware that it's really important to start cleaning up now. I also hope to see something easy to implement that is conditional policy or conditional route maps for routers, such that TE can be done for when something breaks. We can announce the smaller prefixes that we need when we become islands. So, what comes out of this? You're too late to change this. It's in play. It's going to happen. But today we need to validate our current processes. We need to prepare for some flavor of signing or way to track transfers. We need to get our sales staff involved and understand what's going on in this process. We need to get our abuse staff involved, because spammers are certainly going to get harder to manage, and blacklisting space or getting space removed from blacklist is going to be a significant challenge as transfers happen. So if you haven't started using V6 to reduce these impacts, please start using V6. As Mark said, if you don't like something, change it. Get involved in the policy process. For this, you're too late, but what happens for the next one? You really need to, in operations, be involved in the policy process before it gets to this point.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Dan.
So as one of the advisory council members with ARIN who actually had to vote on this policy, there were a lot of concerns by all of us over what the implications of this change might be. But in the end, I think it will serve a good purpose in that it's another tool in the kit that organizations can use during the transition to IPv6 once ARIN is no longer a source of resources. The primary goal was not to extend the life of V4 or to continually perpetuate its use. It was so organizations could still possibly acquire resources to manage through the transition and also now allow new entrants into the market. From the perspective of a large ISP, we don't see this as a major benefit or a path forward. Given the global consumption of IP resources, any supply that would come about by this kind of a policy change isn't going to provide for very long-term growth. And from an ISP's perspective, there's very little incentive for an ISP to relinquish their resources during this transition phase because they're needed to provide connectivity for their own customers. In the end, V6 is still just the way forward. You know, given the number of devices that are joining the internet that would benefit from unique IPs, even if we were able to take advantage of a transfer policy, it still doesn't change our path of deploying native V6 connectivity. And that's it.
Oh, great. Great. Last but not least is Kevin. There you go.
First of all, I'm speaking for myself, not my employers, the U.S. government, any of those other folks. I'm not sure any of those even have an opinion on these matters. I suspect the answer is that they do not. And of course, as always, I do have an opinion on everything, and it's worth everything you paid for it. First of all, the transfer policy is a little bit behind the times because, in fact, there's already transfers going on sub rosa. Various mechanisms are being used to do it, but it's pretty small scale right now. But the reality in this world is that if you have a commodity that has some value, that can be monetized in any way, someone somewhere is going to be interested in buying it legally or otherwise. And if the commodity is in short supply, and if it's essential to doing your business, the price is going to grow to the point where people are going to sell. That is simple reality, and all of the idealists who say that these things should never be charged for, it's just simply not going to happen. The only question is how it's controlled and regulated and where the money flows. Prohibition just simply does not work. That's why this transfer policy was so important, or at least could have been, if anybody could really understand it. But every time we try to prohibit some form of commodity market that a large segment of the population wants to be involved in, and when I say large, that doesn't mean anywhere near a majority, well, that prohibition has historically failed. Prohibition was one of the great social disasters of the 20th century, or rather. It tends to be expensive, and it tends to cause ancillary problems that were far worse than the problem we were trying to control. We don't want a black market. Black markets are ad hoc. There is no oversight. Rules are made up on the fly. It's anarchic. There's no real control or anything that resembles fairness about it. It's a case of somebody wants something, somebody has something, and they reach some sort of agreement that may or may not be beneficial to society as a whole. The policy we have now is a start. It was put together probably by as little as approaches consensus as any ARIN policy that has ever been implemented, I believe. Rough consensus means that most of the ARIN policies, there's not a large body that objects to it very vocally. This policy, there is still a large number of people who object to it vocally. But the reality is we need a policy that does allow the transfer of address space. We need a policy that allows it to happen in a manner that is regulated, fair, but that does not stifle the market so that people go around the market. The moment you have that happening in any large number, you're back to the anarchy. But the bottom line is, when a /18 stands between you and the continued existence of your business, would you be willing to buy that address block on the black market? And the answer for an awful lot of people is yes. And until the transfer policy reaches the point where the number of people in that mode near zero, the problem is not solved.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So at this point, if you guys have any questions, let's come to the mics. We have just a few minutes. And go ahead, Heather.
Heather Schiller, Verizon Business. Are you saying that until the policy removes the requirement to justify the address space, that you're still going to have a black market? Because I think that a black market's going to exist for two reasons. It's going to exist because someone wants address space that they know they can't go to ARIN and justify, or someone wants address space to do something shady to begin with. And they don't want it to be attributed to them. Please don't take my picture.
Right. No, I am not implying there should be no justification. I said it needs to be a regulated, controlled market. But the justification requirements have to be such that you do not have a significant number of people who decide they have to go around the regulations and basically cheat by using a black market. Actually, we need to have some regulation that ensures fairness of address space distribution. It just simply has to be flexible enough that it can actually work.
So the justification requirement is the same as what it takes to get address space from ARIN today. Are you saying that that should be relaxed or changed?
Actually, that standard is probably, depending on how you read the transfer policy, once again, the transfer policy is not the most understandable thing in the world. And I think that I probably did not understand it as most of the people in this room, or at least most of the people who've spoken understood it. I'm hoping that they're right and I'm wrong. And unfortunately, that will get lawyers involved too, so that also presents problems. But no, I think the justification that's there now is one that is fairly reasonable, and it will work effectively as long as there are a reasonable number of people who are prepared to assign address space under these grounds.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is the problem then isn't any different today. So the black market that exists today is because people don't want to go through ARIN for whatever variety of reasons. It's going to exist post-depletion anyway.
It's small. The market today is small, and as long as we keep it small, then the system doesn't break down. When it gets large, that's when things fail.
Marty?
And actually, I think one of the concerns is that as the space starts to run out, the policy makes justification a lot more difficult. And if that happens, then the market will grow. And that's not something we want to occur.
All right. Hey, Marty?
Hey, guys. Thanks for this panel. It's really good and informative. I just wanted to offer a couple of data points. So when you talk about markets, I think you're talking about the markets, or you believe that the markets are as small as they were when David Conrad was saying that the markets existed 3 or 4 years ago and everyone doubted them. Today, the market is much bigger than I think you seem to imply here. I can tell you, I can give you data points such as IP addresses are worth something like $4 an address, /32, that it's evolved to sophisticated models like leasing. And really, I think that, you know, talking about policy to trying to address this at some corporate level is probably not going to be effective, and it's a little behind the 8 ball, so to speak. I think we're going to see people do exactly what they want and find ways to get around ARIN with their address space if they think that they can make a buck. And I think what's going to be important when that happens is that there's some level of trust. I don't really know where ARIN is going to be able to play in this, and I'm not saying that they're not going to be able to, but I think that, you know, everyone should wake up a little bit and realize that it's not just a black market. There's a lot of unanswered questions, and it's a lot bigger than people think it is. Thank you.
Yeah, part of that point is really great. Is how are the operations people going to play in this transfer policy? is really an important piece. We already know that transfers are going to happen, and there is right now some ARIN involvement, some registry involvement, some without registries. But we still need some way of controlling the authenticity of those transfers so it doesn't get out of control.
So I'm going to go ahead and close the mic because we are coming close to the where we're beyond our break. So go ahead, Mr. Schiller, and let's go ahead and close the mic at this point, and then we can go on a break after this.
Jason Schiller, Verizon UUNet. I just wanted to clear up one thing that was said. Today, ARIN policy does not make it more difficult to get address space as we near depletion. In the past, there have been some discussions about making it more difficult as we near depletion. In the future, we will continue to have such discussions. If you think it's a good idea to ration the IP space and make it more difficult to get addresses as we near depletion, I urge you to get involved in those conversations. If you think this is a bad idea because it increases the pain point and makes it sooner, I urge you to get involved in those conversations. Those conversations are ongoing, but at the moment, the current plan of record is to continue having the same justification as we had in the past. That may change.
Thank you.
Sandra Murphy, Sparta. I think Tom's slides mentioned how is this transfer program going to affect the RPKI cider work. And I would just like to say that I believe that it is entirely possible to represent the transfer within the RPKI cider work. It's no problem at all. Okay? Might be interesting to explore the security ramifications of how ARIN is going to deal with this transfer request, but that's a separate matter entirely. Okay?
That assumes that ARIN is always part of the process. So they currently are part of the process, but if we keep going and relaxing the policy, if we ever get to a point where possibly ARIN is not part of that process as the transfer agent or the escrow agent,
Yes?
then it becomes, I would think that would become quite a challenge.
Just extemporaneously, I would say that it is possible right now in the RPKI definition for some entity to allocate all of its resources to some other entity. That's no problem at all. If you wanted to insert some other trusted party to speak to the transfer so that the second party could be assured its addresses would never get pulled back, that would be a different matter entirely. Okay. If ARIN wasn't the second party. Okay? All right.
This is Manish from Merit. One concern I had with this and other ARIN policies is that it does not take into account the cost on the BGP global routing table. And this policy, more than anything else, has a direct impact on the growth of that table. I mean, if you're going to allow people to trade sub-blocks, I mean, you're going to get a whole massive increase in the global table. My personal opinion is I've always said, you know, I've always thought that ARIN probably should not be concerned about this, but the more you look at policies like this, they cannot exist independent of or an awareness of the impact on the global routing table.
Just keep in mind that one point that's made clear in all of our decks is deaggregation is going to happen, transfers are going to happen with or without a transfer policy in place. This is primarily for the purpose of keeping contact information accurate.
Yeah, and what's more, the growing routing table, I mean, that's just the cost of doing business on the internet. You just have to keep upgrading your gear, and that's simply the cost to do business. If you can't do that, then get out of the game.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And Cisco and Juniper, thank us very much for the deaggregation tendency we have.
Thanks, guys. Really nice panel. Break time. Mark's going to be back after the break with the other half of his panel, so see you back at 11:30, I guess. Yep. Thanks again.